everybody, I am Jared Ross, the GeneaVlogger, and welcome back to another Professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to my DNA test results Black Friday by It's Black Friday. This is a channel I am not familiar with. It looks like it is a goth-based channel, but the channel is run by a girl who seems to be of European ancestry, but I really don't know much about her, so we'll find out together. But before we do jump into the video, please be sure to give this a like. It really does help me out. Also, be sure to subscribe and click that bell for notifications on future videos. With all that fun stuff said, let's go ahead and jump into the video.
Hey everybody, how are you? I thought I would share this special experience with you. I've seen a few people on YouTube revealing their DNA results when they get them from Ancestry.com or 23andMe, and I think there's another one or two now, I don't know. But anyway, mine's from Ancestry.com. But a few members of my family have done it, like my cousins and my stepmother have done it, I think, and like it's just so fascinating. It's so cool. If you don't know what I'm talking about, if you don't know what this is, what the results are, what I'm talking about with DNA, this test tells you where your DNA has come from for like the last 1,000 years. So what you're making.
And not all the DNA tests tell you where you came from in the past 1,000 years. There's very specific ones that will tell you that. Y-DNA tests, mitochondrial DNA tests, those will tell you your DNA thousands of years. But the typical tests, what are known as the autosomal tests, so that's going to be your ancestry DNA, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and then if you do family tree DNA, their family finder test. That is going to be just maybe the past 300 to 500 years. So one of the misconceptions that can happen with these tests, but let's continue.
Basically. And I think a lot of people who've done the test have been very surprised to find out that they're not who they thought they were, because I guess we have very much this idea of our identity, like who we are, where we're from. My family, I come from New Zealand, my family comes from New Zealand, but only for the last 3 generations have we been in New Zealand, and this is the case every branch of my family. Most of my family before that, so most of my great-grandparents came from Scotland. I know that there's a bit of England and Ireland in there as well. I've done a lot of research on Ancestry.com. I haven't paid for a membership or something. Just the amount of stuff that you can access for free without the paid membership is incredible. And
yeah, and even beyond Ancestry, there's all sorts of genealogical sites that offer free stuff like Family Search. A lot of the big sites will do little specials where they offer certain collections for free, but then even beyond that, there are different collections depending on where you're researching, where the records may be available and free online. So like anyone researching in the Netherlands, you're going to have tons of stuff for free online, and they're going to be on archive websites. Websites actually run by the government-run archives. And then different countries will have different things. In Ukraine, for Jewish records, there's this guy, Alex Krakowski, who's been going around digitizing all sorts of stuff with his team that, this is records that have not been available for long, long amounts of time. And they're putting them up on Wikimedia, Ukrainian-based Wikimedia. So it's making all of these records available for free. So there's all sorts of different places you can go where you can find all sorts of different records. So yeah, what she's saying here is exactly what we like to hear as genealogists when we hear people do DNA tests, because doing a DNA test is fun and all that, but it's way, way better if you've done a DNA test in conjunction with actual family research and a family tree. Let's continue.
I've made this enormous family tree, but I take it all with a grain of salt, I guess, because you can't really be sure without digging through actual papers. While building my family tree, there'd be suggested mother, suggested father. I know that some of those are definitely wrong. There's definitely some margin for error. But from doing that, I've traced some of my family back through hundreds of years. I think the farthest back I managed to get was to 1400 and something, which is a long fucking time ago. And yeah, I've traced generations.
And if she was just adding stuff without verifying, then it's questionable how correct that is. Because a lot of people will, they want to trace that far back, and then they'll have, some ancestor in, born 1798, and they have the last name Glovin or something like that, and they don't know their parents, but then, oh, well, there's these Glovins 200 years earlier in France, so it must be them, or, stuff like that. And, people then make this leap and be like, oh, well, there must be these random 2 generations. We don't know who they are, or, we can't connect it, but there must be those there. And unfortunately, that's a common theme with genealogies that people find, and that's why you really need to verify stuff as you go along.
Generations and generations of my family back to several parts of Scotland. So like I said, my family's from New Zealand, but my family identifies as being Scottish. That's on both sides of my family. A big chunk of my family came from Larnac, so like just south of Glasgow, some from Edinburgh, a lot from the Isle of Skye, specific areas of the Isle of Skye, some further north, closer.
Ways you can tell someone's actually done their genealogy is they name a lot of very specific places, because you have a lot of ancestors, and all of those ancestors, for most people, aren't in the same towns, but they will be in a lot of areas nearby. And if you do enough research into your family trees, you often see certain places popping up over and over, especially as you get into different branches. And that's when when you start talking to someone who's done their genealogy, and it's like, well, where are you from? They can rattle stuff off like this because they've seen those names over and over, and they've probably looked into it and tried to, learn about it, because that's one of the interesting things, like, where do I come from? And then when you do kind of find where you are from, then it's like, well, what was that place? What's the history of that place? So, it's kind of that typical genealogy thing. So it's funny hearing that. She definitely has done her research on her family.
I just love genealogy. I think it's super fascinating. What I really want to know is, so my mother's father's mother was probably Indian. And the story, as we understand it, though it may or may not be true, the story as we understand it was that my great-great-grandfather was one of those British colonists or whatever who came to India to run a tea plantation and got a woman pregnant and had children. I think they both died there. But anyway, my great-grandfather grew up as an orphan in an orphanage in the north of India, and the orphanage burnt down along with like all his info. But he apparently didn't really look very Indian, but just like a little bit. Apparently my horrible and racist Glaswegian great-grandmother from the other side of the family referred to him as like the coloured side of the family. And I've only seen one picture of him, but it was in black and white, so I mean you can't tell. But basically it'll be interesting to see if I have any Indian in me. If that story is true, whether any of that DNA and...
I forgot exactly how many greats she said, but it sounded like it was like 2 or 3. So if that is the case, then she'll probably get somewhere between, I would say, could be anywhere as low as 1 or 2%. I mean, technically she might not get any if it's far enough back, but it could be, as low as 1 or 2%, could be as high as 6%. If it's anything over 6%, I think it'll be somewhat surprising.
Ended up in me. I think that'll be really interesting because it's a whole branch of my family I know nothing about. So what I'm expecting to see is Great Britain and Ireland, probably Scandinavia, because this goes back like 1,000 years, possibly some French, and maybe some Indian. Anything else would be a total surprise. So let's have a wee look. Whoa, surprise!
Typical Northwest European.
Ireland and Norway. Oh look, Scotland! Central Scotland, Ulster and Ireland, northeast and central Scotland. That's so funny. Okay, Ireland and Scotland, 52%. England, Wales, and northwestern Europe, 44%. Okay, that's not surprising. The other regions tested. Oh, okay.
So it doesn't look like there's any Asian coming through, none of the Indian, none of the, in any sort of form, Asian, Southwest Asian, Indian, anything like that. So I wonder if she does have that ancestry or if she just didn't inherit any of that DNA. So it would be interesting to have her parents test whichever side that she thought it was coming through. See if they get any.
I am 52% Scottish, 44% just Great Britain, and it says Northwestern Europe, so we've got France is circled here. I think it's just like the general area, and Norway, 4%. So other regions tested. So let's have a look. Whoa, alright. Africa. Have I got any Africa in me?
No.
None. Wow,
it would have told everything that it's showing in these other regions. It's basically every region they're defining. So they're trying to tell you, okay, this is how we're defining every single one.
It hasn't shown up anything for India at all. Apparently, my great-grandfather came from specifically Kalimpong, which is fucking where. That's it. That's me. I'm totally white. Whoa, who knew? That's it? Like,
Now, I should say, too, she kept saying, this will show thousands of years. Nothing in this test is showing her anything back thousands of years. This is really only giving a snapshot of the past 300 to 500 years. If it was showing much further than that, there would probably be a lot huger of a mix. But people's autosomal DNA, there's nothing you can really read from it to give any sort of information that far back.
my great-grandfather who grew up in northern India, I have none of that. Northern England, oh right, we can get specific.
Yeah, but we also need to remember, too, even though he was in northern India, he was living there, and obviously his parents must have lived there, he may not have been half European, half Indian. He might have only had a very small percentage of Indian. Maybe your great-grandfather's grandmother was Indian and then all the rest of his grandparents were European. Then he was only 25%. And, well, you would only get, 12.5% of what he had. So 12.5% of 25%, basically 1/8 of 25%. But she did mention she had a lot of family members who had tested. So if any of the family members who are from that side that should get any Indian, if they're from older generations especially, it would be good to focus on their tests, see, did they get any Indian? Did they get any South Asian, Southwest Asian, or anything like that that could indicate towards that Indian ancestry if it is there.
So all this area is highlighted, but it's not showing up that I have connections to any specific regions. Do I have any French? Do I have any French in me?
Maybe?
No. Or just...
I mean, it also depends on what you mean by French in a sense, I mean, people who live in certain areas of France might not necessarily be as French as you would think in a certain way. They might be more Germanic. And then if you also just mean, did you have ancestors who lived in France? You possibly could, but maybe they were only in France for a few generations and they were actually from elsewhere. So, that's the issue with the percentages. They don't tell you anything, but, doing the genealogy will tell you, and you've done your genealogy. So then the question comes, what can you confirm with the DNA and what can't you? And using your admixture is not going to help there either. You've got to use your DNA matches.
DNA matches.
Yeah, DNA matches. All right, look at that. Close family. So 1975, that's a really close. Obviously, it says close family first cousins. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a first cousin. It just means that that's the typical amount of DNA shared with a first cousin, but there are multiple relationships that will have similar amounts of DNA. So like aunts and uncles and nieces and nephews. So that could be her aunt possibly. And then we have all these second cousins. So she has pretty good matches. So she should actually, hopefully she'll have matches from the side that has that supposed Indian ancestry. And if so, she should look and see what are they getting for their results. Do they get any of that Asian ancestry?
It's found my aunt. Hello. When I don't look like this, when I look like I naturally look like if I let my hair grow out or whatever, I look very Scottish, right? Kind of surprised not to see anything from India or Asia. I really thought that there would be, like, if it's picking up 4% Norway from like 1,000 years ago, then surely if my great...
Yeah, I mean, that could be a reason why she is confused, is because she is thinking that this somehow traces back thousands of years. And while sure that Norway, Sweden could be coming from some sort of ancient Viking ancestry that made its way into a population group that you descend from in a lot of ways, and then you get, a couple of different percentages, but that's not quite as likely, because more than likely there's a couple of other possibilities. First thing off is that there's a difficulty in reading the different, differences between these DNA population groups. So it could just be that it's hard to read that population group, and because of that, there's certain amounts of DNA that's actually coming from our Scottish ancestry that looks like it's Swedish or Norse just because of the ancestral connections between them. And then, of course, there's also the possibility maybe she has like a third or fourth great grandparent that came from Norway. She has done her genealogy and she's built a family tree, but how much of it has she actually verified, which she mentioned she didn't really, but on top of that, how much of it is missing? So, does she know all of her fourth great grandparents. There's 64 of them. So if any of those are missing, it's always a possibility maybe there was a Swedish ancestor who made their way to England or Scotland or wherever in the 1800s, and then that's how it came through. So not the best thing to just assume, oh, it must be coming from Vikings, and then use that as like, well, then why am I not getting this Indian that is in this family story of mine? If the Indian is, a third, fourth, fifth great grandparent or more distant, there's always a possibility that you just didn't inherit any of that DNA. And so you would want to look at other family members to see, did any of them get it?
If my great-great-grandmother was from part of India, then it would show that up being more, like there'd be more of it, right? Because it's more recent. Unless it's possible to just not get any of the DNA from one of your great-great-grandparents, or that's weird. Yeah, wow. So basically,
it's I think she's kind of getting it, but she's not, because she has certain assumptions about the test that are a little off. Biggest one being that, it can trace thousands of years back. Autosomal DNA, which is what Ancestry does not do that. To look thousands of years back, you would need to do Y-DNA or mitochondrial DNA. And she does have an idea of where this Indian ancestry might be coming from. So maybe it is much further back than what she even thinks. Maybe it's like a fifth or sixth great grandparent of hers. So even maybe her parents or aunts or, some of the older generations might not have inherited any DNA as well from this Indian ancestry. Well, if it's up a specific line, then they could figure out a way to do mitochondrial DNA ancestry to figure it out, or Y-DNA, depending. She did say it was the great-grandfather, so then I guess it would have to be Y-DNA technically. And I think she might have mentioned it was her great-grandfather's mother, which then means that, that would kind of rule out that possibility of doing Y-DNA and mitochondrial DNA testing to figure it out.
I'm really white, and that's that, really. I am who I always thought I was, so that's cool. I mean, I can continue with my feeling Scottish because I am, apparently. I'm going to have a play around with this, see if I can discover any relatives, have a wee dig through my tree, dig through other people's trees. It's really, really good fun. I think it's just nice to know who you're made of. With every generation that goes back, the amount of great-grandparents you have doubles. So essentially at the end of the day, we're all connected somehow. Like, it's shown me to have was it like 2,000 or something, like 5th, 8th cousins or something. It's like, that's crazy. Like I said, I've traced like so much of my family to Larnac, like just south of Glasgow. I traced it all the way back to like the Laird of Blackwood. I'm like, ooh. Oh, so like my 11th great grandfather was a laird, and there's a castle there. So basically, I could rock up and be like, this is basically my castle. Yeah, I don't think that would really fly. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to my channel. You want to come and join us. And as always, take care of yourselves, be nice to each other, and remember that we're all just one big interconnected family. And I will see you next time. Bye.
All right, that was a pretty decent video. She had a pretty good grasp on the test overall. I mean, the biggest downside with it being, she was under the assumption that this is going to trace back thousands of years, which it's not. I think she probably heard that somewhere about Y-DNA testing or mitochondrial DNA, and then kind of thought that that's what this was talking about. It was certainly interesting that, she has this family story of Indian ancestry, but unfortunately the test here didn't prove or disprove it. It's leaning towards kind of disproving it, but at a third great grandparent distance or further, it is very possible she just didn't inherit any of that DNA. Now, she obviously has a lot of close relatives on there. She had the aunt, she had a couple of second cousins. She probably has a lot of other third cousins and fourth cousins and stuff. And if she's able to place them in the tree and especially connect them to the branch that should have that Indian ancestry, like I said, looking at their admixtures would be super helpful to figure out, are they getting anything? And then on top of that, something I didn't mention, she can look at her matches and see, is she getting anybody who's matching her where they have extremely high amounts of Asian, South Asian, something like that. Like, especially if she found multiple matches where they were all like 100% South Asian. That could be indicative of her having that Indian ancestry, even if she's not getting it in the admixture itself. She is the exact type of person that genealogists love to see take the DNA test, because she's into genealogy, so she's actually going to use it beyond just like, oh, look at these percentages. And I see that this video is from April of 2019, so it's just under 3 years old. And it just makes me wonder, what has she done with it since? How much has she expanded her tree? And I bet a lot of what I'm saying now, she probably knows pretty well, because when you do this for genetic genealogy, you're constantly trying to learn, okay, what does this mean? What does that mean? And I mean, I'm sure a lot of you watching my videos, it's exactly why you're watching these videos. You're trying to learn what it all means. And as you learn more and more and more, you figure it out. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of what I'm saying now, she's already figured it out, because you can obviously tell she is into the genealogy. She's into the family history. She did all the typical stuff I expect from genealogists, very specific places. She had that distant ancestor, her 11th great grandfather. She knew who he was. And being that she's so into the genealogy side of it, I wonder if she has actually uploaded her DNA to some of the other sites to get into their databases, and especially some of the lesser known sites like GeneNet, which is a French run website that caters mostly to the European crowd, obviously, a lot of Northwestern European and all of that, but they have a lot of people in their database that you might not be able to find in some of these other databases. And then of course you have your main ones like GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, MyHeritage, Living DNA. So hopefully she checks out this reaction I do and maybe comments and lets us know, what has she found from her DNA. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a thumbs up. That really does help me out. You can click right about here if you'd like to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. And you can follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at GeneaVlogger. I'm the GeneaVlogger. See you in my next video.